this is not global leadership. And the truth is, when it comes to refugee resettlement, the history has always been that if we lead, other countries follow. And when we take a step back, other countries use that as an excuse to do the same.
From every angle. Krish, we're live with Krish O'Mara Vignarajah. I got their last name right. She is the president and CEO of Global Refuge, and my Substack. Oh, there you go. Where people can see us right now. They're coming in slowly. Sometimes Substack has these hiccups. Folks, Krish is the CEO and president of Global Refuge. She's was also a policy director in President Obama's administration. Specifically, she was a policy director for Michelle Obama, and she's also a proud mom, and like me, a recovering attorney. And the timing of this conversation is perfect because for those who have come on, I've been very blunt in my labeling that America is now a refuge, a safe space, if you will, for white nationalist refugees. Everybody else, good luck. Folks, we're in a situation where openly, a few days ago, the Trump administration said that they will limit the number of refugees coming to America during a time of immense instability. I mean, there's a genocide happening in Gaza. There's a genocide in Sudan. There's a genocide against the Uyghurs. There's a genocide against the Rohingya. But the refugees, I'm going to put in quotation marks, Krish, who will be allowed to come to the United States of America are just shockingly of a certain melanin and shockingly espouse certain politics. Krish, I'm sure this is just a coincidence, but can you break this down?
Yeah. So this, at a time of unprecedented global crisis when it comes to mass displacement, for
Oh no,
reasons.
Krish, you're breaking up. Oh, you're back. You're back.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. So traditional reasons like war, persecution, violence, and then relatively newer reasons like climate disasters. So when you think about the fact that we have never had as many displaced as we currently have, and the US government decides to reduce the number of refugees admitted into the US to its lowest level, and then that very few who can come need to meet certain criteria in terms of, having faced the type of persecution that purportedly white Afrikaners have faced, it obviously sends such a stark and incredibly different signal than we've ever seen before. And so, at a time when we're talking about, Afghanistan and what's happening with the Taliban, Darfur and Sudan, this is not global leadership. And the truth is, when it comes to refugee resettlement, the history has always been that if we lead, other countries follow. And when we take a step back, other countries use that as an excuse to do the same.
Oh, and that's a really good point, right? There's that saying that when America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. And when America, at least despite our hypocrisies and our mistakes, at least performs as an advocate for, refugee resettlement, for liberties and freedoms and free press, the rest of the world then is forced to, in a way, perform as well. But when the United States of America says, meh, F that, the rest of the world says, well, if the United States of America doesn't have to do it, why the F do we have to do it? If the United States of American president can incite a violent insurrection, let me try to do that in Brazil. If you can pardon all these criminals, I'll pardon these criminals. If everything is transactional, I'll be transactional. If you can crush the press, I'll crush the press, right? I don't even have to perform. Look, Donald Trump is doing it. The United States of America is doing it. And so talk to us about the numbers that are involved with this refugee program, how it's the lowest number ever. And that number is only allocated for a certain group.
Yeah. So the president sets what's called the presidential determination, the PD. And that is unilateral authority. And that's been true for Democratic and Republican presidents. And so you can kind of challenge that thinking in terms of why make a system, created and vulnerable to the whim of just how the White House views this issue in a political climate. But basically, that is the ceiling or the target. So under President Biden, that number had been 125,000. The president just announced that that number is going to be 7,500, so 7,500.
Can you repeat the
And
number under Obama again?
yeah, so it had been at a high, it had been 125,000 under President Obama. Under President Biden, it had been also 125,000. Now, I want to acknowledge we didn't get to actually resettle 125,000. That had been the ceiling. So last year, there were about 100,000 refugees who came into the U.S. But President Trump just announced that he is setting that number at 7,500. And the priority population is white Afrikaners, because that was something that the administration had announced previously. And, some of you may have seen it when they rolled out the red carpet for Afrikaners. They had secured a chartered flight to bring them here. Again, out of the ordinary in terms of our typical client gets a UN loan. They take kind of economy class here to the U.S., and then they actually repay that loan. That's how this system is built to be fiscal stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so,
Yeah, I want to stick on that for a second because
yeah,
I've been following this story and a lot of people have forgotten that, a lot of people are like, oh my God, this new, they're so blatant about it. They're only going to resettle 7,500 white refugees from South Africa and from far right parties, right? Or far right white nationalists. But earlier in the year, like you mentioned, the Trump administration brought in through private jet these white South Afrikaners whose first language is not English, who aren't culturally assimilated to America, brought them into America, right, as they're kicking out literally brown people, sending them to a prison in El Salvador without any due process, now literally killing Venezuelan fishermen without any due process, saying that they want to undo birthright citizenship, they want to denaturalize people. But this government spent our taxpayer dollars to bring in, I'm forgetting the number, I think it was 50 plus South African white refugees. And also, Krish, if you know this, I know this, but I think you know this, so I want to ask you about it because I want your take. He did it under the pretext of a conspiracy theory, saying that these white farmers were being oppressed, which was all bullshit. Can you expand on that?
yeah. So the theory had been that white Afrikaners actually qualify under the existing system. Now, the way the system works is refugees have to travel across a international border, and they either go to a refugee camp or they go to a third country. So that is what makes them a refugee, as opposed to someone who may have traveled from Guatemala and come to U.S. soil. They would be seeking asylum. So there is a system that has been in place for decades that allows for an objective arbiter, the United Nations, to look at the criteria that's codified in international law and U.S. law and to make a determination of whether someone qualifies. What the administration did was say, look, like that system may exist, but they've chosen not to use it. And instead, what they looked for were referrals to the U.S. Embassy for individuals who would then apply, and then based on this theory of discrimination, be admitted into the U.S. And so, just the couple points I want to quickly make. One, it's just important to understand like how getting through the system is like winning, Powerball. Only 1% of refugees ever get resettled in their lifetime, right? I mean, this is truly, it's a lifeline, and it is a lifeline for the very few lucky folks. Now, it has become a lifeline for the politically privileged who may be in line, aligned with, the administration. And then just the other piece is there's this underlying assumption that refugees historically have not successfully integrated. And so therefore, to protect America, to protect local communities, you needed to institute these filters on who would qualify. And the reality is, look, there's a lot to criticize in the immigration system. Much of it is broken. But the refugee resettlement system is a system that has had bipartisan support because it actually has been designed and fine-tuned in a way to succeed. And so local communities, through a state refugee coordinator, through community coordination, actually work with the State Department, work with resettlement agencies like ourselves to figure out how do we set up these families and individuals for success. And the reality is that communities come back to say, like, look, we would love to resettle more refugees because it is both the right thing to do and the smart thing to do, because they become valuable contributors to their communities.
And I think it's important for people to know, right? You broke down a lot of important stuff there, that refugees have to be classified as refugees. You just don't say, I'm a refugee. It's a vetting process. And then not just the vetting process, to finally actually resettle is very difficult. And also, when you compare it to the asylees, to be granted asylum in America, folks, is tough. It takes a while. You have to be vetted. There is a process, not just like, hey, I want asylum, I want withholding of removal. No, you have to meet the criteria. They vet you. You'd have to. Most of them get rejected. They make it appeal. I mean, I had to do this when I was a lawyer, right? And a lot of the people get rejected. Like, how the hell did they reject this person? This person has a very credible claim, right? Like, people literally fleeing persecution, and even they get rejected. Then you appeal it, right? So it's very hard. I just want people to all this stuff that all these immigrants are just coming and they're just being refugees and asylums that are taking over American towns and counties. It's all bullshit. It's very, very hard to get asylum. It's very, very hard to be granted a refugee status. It's even harder to be resettled, right? So these white South Afrikaners bypassed all of that. Number one. Number two, they aren't even meeting the hardship criteria that so many of these refugees meet to be considered a refugee, or even a person who's granted asylum, right? They just happen to be white and in South Africa. And Elon Musk and so many other neo-Nazis promoted this. It's a Nazi conspiracy theory of white genocide happening in South Africa. It's so debunked that when the president met the president of South Africa in the White House, he embarrassingly brought this up. He goes, "This is what's happening in white South Africa." He goes, "Respectfully, no, that's all bullshit. That's not what's happening." This has been a lie, folks, for the past 5 years that Elon Musk and white nationalists have promoted. And now that Donald Trump's in the White House, that has become policy. I just want you all to sit with that for a second, right? Now, as the United States is spending taxpayer dollars bringing in these white South African farmers who aren't refugees, aren't really persecuted at all, who are they ignoring? Krish.
Yeah. I mean, the 99% who will never had a shot at this program. And just to give you a scale of what we were talking about, there are over 120 million people who are displaced, over 40 million refugees. That number is going to steeply decline. So when you think about climate displacement, some people put the figure at 216 million will be displaced by 2050. And that's viewed as a conservative estimate. Al Gore says that number is actually going to be a billion, right? And so I think that's where, when you talk about what you're seeing right now in the news, in policy, the rhetoric is around, okay, well, if you didn't come the right way, we're going to deport you. But if you did, we're going to protect you. That's not the case of what we're seeing, because they're changing who is eligible for the legal pathways. We're seeing also the greatest dedocumentation in U.S. history in terms of people who came with temporary protected status, people who came through humanitarian parole, who checked off every box, who jumped through every hoop we said that would allow you to come the right way. Well, those people who came the right way are now vulnerable to deportation because their legal status, what they had as a legal status, is being taken away. And so just to give you a couple examples of populations that we're talking about Afghans who worked alongside the U.S. military. They may have tried to apply through the special immigrant visa program, but as a result of all the chaos that ensued, they didn't get the SIV, and so they decided to come through to apply through the refugee program. So this is kind of who is being crowded out. Ukrainians who may still, be struggling as a result of the ongoing war and are seeking asylum. Burmese, those who are coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan. And so it's just incredibly hard when you think about the fact that the world's on fire.
That's right.
And the one system that allowed for people to have a shot of protecting themselves and their children in terms of a humanitarian response, that basically is being gamed.
And it's, I mean, let's focus on Afghans for a second, right? Because folks, the country engaged in the war on terror. To punish the 19 foreign hijackers who brought down the two towers, George W. Bush said, "Let me go attack Afghanistan." Right? These Afghans, folks, that Krish is talking about, are people who helped U.S. soldiers. There were translators. There were on the ground. There were consultants, experts, to the risk of their own lives because they were outed, and thus Taliban saw them as traitors. They were promised, in exchange for your service, in exchange for your help, in exchange for trying to free this country of the Taliban, you will get to resettle. You will get to come to America. And the Trump administration said, nah. And America said, nah. And I would even say the Biden administration should have done more to resettle Afghans, right? And then you have the people with temporary protected status. There's one group in particular that just this week, J.D. Vance has again attacked with another neo-Nazi lie, the Haitians stealing dogs and pets. Can you talk to us about the Haitian American community of Springfield, Ohio?
Yeah. So when people, hear things that, frankly, to most of us, I would say, sound so absurd, I think it's incredibly important. So I appreciate the question for us to not dismiss it out of hand, because just the nature, right, of social media and the lack of local news is that people hear these things. They then kind of, they repost some nonsense again, and then it all of a sudden has, new life breathed into it. And so people actually think that Haitian immigrants, are stealing, domestic pets. That this is their food source, and obviously nothing could be further from the truth. And yet we still have to say that out loud, and we have to say it vehemently for people to understand what happened in Springfield. So, like many other cities that had lost population, as a result of factories dying away, things being outsourced, Springfield lost population. And then when businesses actually came back to kind of rebuild a vibrant economy, they realized, oh, shoot, I don't actually have the workforce I need. And so they actually actively encouraged immigrants in particular to take jobs that maybe other Americans were not going to take. And so when, Haitian immigrants in particular learned of the opportunities, they said, okay, well, we're going to come. And once you have an anchor, right, it becomes a magnet for those from a similar community who could say, look, like there's a real vibrant community for us to be a part of Springfield, but also be a part of, a community that we have some connection to. And so that's why, when you talk to people in Springfield, they love their, Haitian neighbors. And yet, some nonsensical Facebook post just got viewed by a politician who was like, oh, great, this kind of feeds into my narrative of othering immigrants and dehumanizing them. And so that's kind of how you heard it in a presidential election. And lo and behold, leaders in the White House continue to parrot it.
So, I mean, it's not just denying folks, the people who are actually refugees, meet the requirement, need protection, like Afghans, like Sudanese, like Palestinians in Gaza, like Ukrainians. It's also removing the protected status of immigrants who have been here for years, have worked here, and have made these rural, oftentimes red communities better. They're trying to denaturalize people. They're trying to end birthright citizenship. I'm not making this up. Donald Trump has asked the Supreme Court to end birthright citizenship. Donald Trump has already removed the temporary protected status, right, of how many hundreds of thousands of Latinos, right? So it's not just Muslims.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I guess you could view this as kind of an equitable approach, in the sense that, they're targeting folks from pretty much every region. And I think that's where it's just the adding insult to injury, right? The idea that most Americans, even if they debate, uh, I wouldn't even say they debate dreamers, but even if they debate what happens at our southern border, they still believe that it is important to have legal pathways that allow for both protection and meeting our national security needs and meeting our economy. And so the idea that, we have an administration that is shutting down all of those pathways, I think is why you are starting to see a backlash. Now, from my vantage point, I started in this role in 2019. Do I see the intensity of resistance to some of the most draconian, inhumane, and illegal policies? No. But I'm going to maybe caveat that with not yet, although I'd be curious to see, if you think we're at a tipping point.
Well, I think there's overreach, and the proof of the overreach is in the latest polls, where everyone's concentrating how Donald Trump is a negative 31 on the economy, negative 20 on jobs and tariffs and inflation. The lowest approval rating of any president in modern history at this point of their presidency, where it should be a honeymoon period. He's even lower than where he was during his first administration. But people, and this is what I'm focusing on also. In addition to that, he's negative 11 on what used to be his strongest issue, immigration. He's negative 11, folks. The overreach is here. People did not vote for masked armed thugs to beat up grandma and grandpa, to zip tie children, to go to schools and literally, you saw that horrific video of the mom who dropped off her kid at high school. So they picked her up and then he said, "Mom, mom," and they friggin' arrested that kid. This is not what they voted for tear gassing unarmed priests. They did not ask for this type of ugliness where you're ending birthright citizenship, where you're sending over 200 brown men without due process to die in a prison. And then friggin' Chris Van Hollen has to go there and get proof of life of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He was negative 19 when that happened, which is why we have to keep this in the news, right? When Democrats punt on this, Krish, it infuriates me because they're Republican light. They go tough on crime. But once you actually make something into a story, once you create the story, then most people are like, "Oh yeah, right." But Democrats are so terrified. "Oh no, the poll numbers. This is his strong suit. He's tough on security, tough on crime. We're weak. Let's pass the Lake O'Reilly Act. Let's demonize the woke." But no, if you actually lead like Chris Van Hollen did, I think it's a great example. You lead, you control the narrative, you capture the eyeballs, and then people are asking themselves, "Yeah, man, why is this guy who was given protected status here by a judge who got married here, has American kids, has never committed any crimes, whom ICE itself has said we made a mistake by sending him to El Salvador? Why are all these innocent brown people being kidnapped and sent? That's not right." And so I think now what you're seeing, especially with masked armed agents in Portland, in Chicago, cracking. I hate to say this, Krish, but I said it before. I'll say it again. In this country, you're a woman of color. I'm a man of color. We're both Desi. White lives matter more. White tears matter more. White rage matters more. Once they see white priests getting shot, 79-year-old white shopkeepers, I think people are like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is a step too far. And I think, in addition to everything I just said, all the pro-Nazi content that's come out in the past 2 weeks, I know you've been following the news, the Telegram messages and the texts. Now this is so on the nose, Krish, this latest news that they're only giving special status to white South Africans. I think it's unmistakable for even the person who says, "Oh, you guys, no, it's not like that. This is, I think, too much now." That's Ryan.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, as you pointed out, immigration used to be the strong suit of the president. And frankly, you would see a dynamic in the last several months, at least it seemed, that anytime there was, some negative news story, there was a new announcement on immigration to sort of return to their kind of corner of what they believed was their strong suit. And I think you're right that, I regularly hear it from folks who voted for Trump, in this election, who said, right, but, Jose, who is, the guy who comes and cuts my lawn, he's a really good guy, or, Dr. So-and-so, from Afghanistan, he's been he's been our family doctor for years. There's no reason for why he got targeted. And I mean, look, I think that's an opportunity, right? So rather than having people just hear what's amplified on Facebook because of some absurd algorithm about Haitians and eating animals, they then have a personal interaction that they can turn to say, look, this has gone too far because I feel this in terms of my personal network, in terms of my community, in terms of, a raid at my children's school where I don't want my child to be traumatized, right? And I just think the fact that they have gone to such an extreme is an opportunity. At the same time, and it's frankly why I'm so grateful for you covering this issue, I have found that because it's such a competitive news cycle, by contrast to Trump 1, where immigration was the hot button issue and you could actually have an opportunity to get out there and say, like, look, what you were hearing in terms of immigrants being the root cause of the affordable housing crisis and the opioid epidemic and, crime spiking in certain areas, like that's just scapegoating, right? That's just pinning it on a population that doesn't have a voice. But look, if you took every single immigrant out of our communities, we would still have an affordable housing crisis. And in fact, actually, immigrants are a key part of the solution because they represent a third of our construction, workforce. And so I think that is where I hope we have a window now, like conversations like this, where we can go out there and say, look, like, we're a sovereign nation. We need to secure our border. Do we need to build a wall? No, we have to recognize that it is 2025. And just as AI is such a pioneering force, like we should be thinking about how there is technology to be thoughtful on how we manage that. At the same time, most Americans agree that we need to have legal pathways that appreciate who we are as a nation, that recognize that we have the lowest birth rate since the census has been tracking this. We face a demographic cliff. When you think about the international competition against countries like China and Russia, we still have a comparative advantage because, lo and behold, people still risk their lives to come into this country. And so I think that's where I hope the window to not just cover this issue, but the window to have conversation, debate, means that we'll actually take baby steps, perhaps, but at least towards some progress.
Do I have you for a couple more minutes, Krish? I think it's time. Baby steps time is over, and I think the reason why it's been over, and the reason why I think that there's an opportunity now is just to break down what you said. The polls show that about 25 to 30% of Americans are worried that someone they personally know will be impacted by these draconian immigration policies, right? So that number is pretty high. They're like, man, I'm worried that someone I know is going to go, like a coworker, an employee, a maid, a cook, a friend. So that's personal. Number two, as far as the economy goes, America's feeling it because people are no longer coming to America. So we have lost up to 40 to 50 billion dollars in revenue because people are like, nah, peace out. I'm not going to come here. And now we're not even getting foreign students. And once you used to get foreign students, folks, foreign students help subsidize scholarships for the people who are born and raised here. So foreign students like, oh, you don't want us? Okay, peace out. Then you're seeing the trade deal.
Universities are also facing the same demographic cliff, right, in terms of a lower American-born population. Sorry.
Yeah. Also, then you're seeing trade wars. Canada's like, all right, we'll just go to China. China's like, oh, you hate us? We'll buy soy from Argentina. So it's hurting the dollar, and this country worships money. Capitalism is our religion. So people are like, oh shit, what do I eat? Racism or food? Let me keep eating racism for a little bit, but they can't afford it anymore, right? And like you mentioned, I think it's very important. These immigrants do the jobs no one else wants to do. So the research shows. Sorry, can you tell people the data? Because the lie about immigrants taking stuff, that's the lie that's happening right now, and the Republicans are saying. Yeah. Undocumented immigrants, we're paying for their Medicaid, and this is all bullshit, which is an excuse for them to shut down the government and not deal with the Democrats to reduce premiums. They're saying, again, in real time, folks, as the government is shut down, they're blaming this all on the undocumented immigrants for, taking all the resources. Can you just separate fact from fiction about immigrants and their contribution to the economy versus what MAGA's saying about them?
Yeah. So, on the quick issue of healthcare and what these debates out in terms of the shutdown, I think it's important to understand there is a very small provision that allows for people, if they are entering the ER with a life-threatening injury, right, situation, to be able to receive medical care. Now, in terms of the spending on this, it is less than 1% of what the kind of spending that we're debating is about. And in terms of what government, what immigrants bring to this country, to the economy alone, just a few points. One, they're not stealing Americans' jobs. They're filling jobs that otherwise would go unfilled, either because Americans don't want to take those jobs. So take the example of, the pickers on our farms, or meat processing plants, or they candidly don't have the qualifications right now for certain, kind of tech professions. There's a reason why even the recent announcements about Nobel Prizes, such a significant number were immigrants. Like when you were talking about universities, when you increase the number of international students who are studying at U.S. universities just by 1%, it doubles the number of patents per capita that come out of, innovators in the country. Nearly half of Fortune 500 companies were created by an immigrant or their child. So when people are looking at the stock market, right, or they're looking at their retirement accounts, understand that a key part of what is driving that is immigrants. And so it's kind of across the skill spectrum. And then just the final point I'll make, because I know that there is this, absurd argument out there that immigrants are just leeches on taxpayer dollars. Immigrants are ineligible for most benefits. And to the extent that they are eligible, immigrants actually are willing to kind of try to go after those benefits at a far lower rate than native-born Americans. And so just to give you one data point, circling back to the start of our conversation on refugees, there was a study that took into account the meager assistance that refugees get at the beginning when they first land. And when you look at, just a few years of their contributions, they contribute a net $63 billion. And I just think that it's important for us to understand that even for Medicare, Social Security, the only way we keep those programs afloat is if we have a younger workforce. And that has to hinge on immigrants, because just the final thing I'll say is even our white population would have declined last year without immigrants.
Yep.
And so I hope folks who, maybe white nationalists understand that protecting
Keep talking. Keep talking.
yeah, of course, that protecting, their demographic is also about immigration. And so, yeah,
No,
I agree with you.
you took it to the next point I was going to make, and I did a TED talk on this a couple years ago, and I tried to reverse engineer this, the case for having babies, and I tried to talk about how there's plunging plunging birth rates in America, in China, in Japan, in the EU, and this is a real problem, folks. And there are certain solutions that we can try that I don't know. We could help out people by giving them a living wage, educating women, progressive pronatal policies like, I don't know, mandatory paid family leave, just throwing this out there. And also, wait for it. The white nationalists, Elon Musk, RFK, Peter Thiel are obsessed with the birth rate, folks. Obsessed with it. You're going to hear about it more and more and more. And they're obsessed because the birth rate has fallen below 2.1. 2.1 is the total fertility rate, right? So if women have an average of 2.1 kids, it keeps the birth rate in the population stable. If it goes above it, you have overpopulation. If it goes under it, you have underpopulation. So in America now, the birth rate has been falling. Now it's like 1.7, 1.6. And EU, it's falling. The immigrants have actually kept that birth rate from falling even lower in the EU and in America. So by having immigrants, it actually keeps the birth rate from like straight up plummeting, right? But the problem for them is these immigrants look like me and Krish, and they're like, damn it, white people have more babies. And Russia tried to give, I'm not making this up, Russia tried to give like free fridges to women, right? Hungary is like giving them these rewards, and people still aren't having babies. The people who are coming, doing the jobs no one wants to do, helping the economy, all the data shows that having immigrants is a net positive to the economy. The group that came out with that study was the Bush. Yes, George W. Bush administration, right? So they're pro-economy, they're pro-entrepreneurship, to help revitalize these local dead communities, literally not just with money, but literally with babies, not making this up. And foreign-born individuals commit less crimes, fewer crimes than people that are born here. It literally is a complete debunking of all the absurd, hateful talking points, which, by the way, is all projection. Who's the one committing crimes? Donald Trump and his buddies. Who's the one rigging the system and grifting? Donald Trump and his buddies. Who's the one frauding? Donald Trump and his buddies. Who's wasting money? Donald Trump just gave $40 billion to his buddy Milei and is spending $350 million on the White House ballroom and $172 million to give to Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski for private jets, all right? So I think it's important for us to debunk this shit because you even see, Krish, some otherwise, I'm going to be blunt, you see liberals who are weak on this issue when it comes to crime and national security and immigration and wokeness. Well, let's be Republican light. Let's be Republican light. Crime, 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 economy, economy, economy. And they lead with the worst dehumanizing talking points, which is all rooted in bullshit. Without immigrants, country stops. The country stops running. All right. And these refugees are people who are literally escaping life and death situations like Gaza, like Sudan, like Ukraine. And you're saying that we have space for white South Afrikaners who are privileged, but not these refugees who historically have shown us to be the hardest workers, do all the jobs no one wants to do, literally revitalize these Rust Belt, rural, Trump voting countries, and pump out babies that keep the birth rate like from falling and keep this capitalist engine from running. Sorry for my rant. What did I miss, Krish?
No, maybe I'll just as a closing comment say, you mentioned the Bush Institute, right? And I think that's where we've got to understand how extreme we have gone.
That's
Because,
right.
like, you see these debates between, Bush and Reagan, and like they would be viewed as woke progressives right now, you know? And I just think that it is really sad because, again, just circling back to refugee resettlement, great example of a program that has always had bipartisan support. We've resettled as many refugees under Republican administrations and as Democratic ones. And so I hope we don't give up hope because of how extreme kind of we've gone from each administration, because I still think the majority of us kind of have a lot more that we agree about in terms of how do we have a system that values family reunification, that meets our economic needs, that also meets our humanitarian obligations. And so that's where I think what gives me hope is in my day job, I still get to go to the reddest of red states and the bluest of blue states, and still most people agree that we need to figure out some way to continue the work of welcoming. Though it's hard to feel downstream of decisions that you have no control over. And though it's trying to assuage our clients that like the worst is over, because I have no guarantee that it is. I still have hope because there's so many individuals, supporters, congregations, community-based organizations that have stepped up, who have responded to exactly what you've described and said, look, this is not who we are.
And it's overreach. And there's an opening here in the worst of times as things will get worse, folks. It will get worse. The economy's getting worse. Trump and Stephen Miller will get more draconian. Just trust the evidence of your eyes and ears. But the majority of Americans are against this. And I want to remind you all that he's -11 now on immigration. I think that number is going to climb in the wrong direction for Donald Trump as people see masked armed ICE agents terrorizing the communities. And the impact of being anti-immigrant and anti-refugee is going to have on both the local and national economy. There's an opening for us to push our elected officials to finally go for immigration reform in a humane way. Now's the time. Just watch. In the next 6 months, the space is open and you need to push your leaders to do the right thing. And I want to remind everyone again that Chris Van Hollen, he went by himself to El Salvador to get proof of life. And because he went, it was in the news cycle, which then forced the pressure, which then brought other Democrats to then talk about the pro-Palestinian activists who were detained in Louisiana. That's how this all works. People said, I need water. I've been talking for the last 4.5 hours. I've been going straight from since 12, Krish. And then I'm going to join Don Lemon at 5 very quickly to say hi to him because I'm an idiot. I'm a child of immigrants, but you're doing fantastic work. Sorry that my voice came out at the end. And there, we got on a Friday, 4 p.m. on October 31st to get 800 people on. This conversation is huge, we're going to have this conversation up on my Substack for those who missed it. I've been talking to Krish O'Mara Vignarajah. She is the president and CEO of Global Refuge. And before I let you go, Krish, shamelessly promote yourself and your organization. Why should people support it?
Sure. I joke that I'm the head of an 86-year-old startup because we realize that, this work needs to continue, but we need to kind of figure out how to do that more effectively. And we work with the most vulnerable children, the most amazing families who help bring that vibrancy to our communities. And so if you want to learn more, get involved in our advocacy efforts, support a child, be a part of our Hope for the Holidays campaign right around the corner. You can learn more about all of that at globalrefuge.org. And then my personal handle, though I'm not nearly as active as you are on social media, is at Krish Vignarajah.
Yeah, globalrefuge.org, and I'll have this up later this weekend, and I'll link to it. Thanks so much, Krish. Everyone else, this is the final steps I'll be doing from the left hook. But we had a whole bunch of conversations today. We had Danielle Moody and I talking about Usha Vance. Oh, Usha. Oh, Usha. Good luck, Usha. And me and not Kushner, Jared Yates Sexton, we're talking about the Groyper and Nick Fuentes takeover of MAGA. I had a conversation with Dean Obeidullah about the rise of Mamdani and Islamophobia. Had a conversation with Ben McKenzie, the actor turned advocate and author, about the great crypto grift. And the final one of today is Krish O'Mara Vignarajah, Global Refuge, about this just horrific, draconian, anti-immigrant policy by the Trump administration that favors, not making this up, white nationalists and white refugees, and how it is disastrous. It is disastrous for our country, our national security, and also for our economy. We're going to have all this up this weekend. And then I'm going to be over at Don Lemon in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Apparently, he's going as Beyonce today for Trick or Treat. So I'm like, all right, man, you go as Beyonce. I'll go as broken South Asian middle-aged uncle who shops at Costco. It's a big stretch. Or actually, here's my costume, Krish. I'm Usha Vance. Too soon? Too soon? Where's Aisha? Where's Aisha? All right, sorry, I had to. We need some catharsis. Folks, thank you, Krish. Enjoy Trick or Treat, everyone. Be kind, be informed. I'll have this all up today or this weekend. And please, oh, please, don't be a fascist. Take care.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.